Welcome to today's Conversation Series program, Creating Excellence Through Coaching, how AstraZeneca and the Royal Bank of Canada implemented their coaching strategies. Coaching is recognized as one of the most powerful development tools available for accelerating performance. Yet many organizations find it challenging to fully integrate coaching into the fabric of their culture. Today will be an inspirational conversation about the importance of their coaching programs and the challenges they overcame to implementing it into their organizations. Hosting today's program is Jennifer Fickler. Over to you, Jennifer.
Great, thank you so much. Appreciate the opportunity. And hi everyone, and welcome, and thanks for joining us for today's conversation. And happy International Coaching Week to everyone. I'm Jennifer Fickler, Senior Vice President, Global Master Coach at LHH. For those of you who are new to LHH, we help companies see the possibilities in their people. Through assessments, coaching, upskilling, recruitment, and career transitioning, companies can realize the untapped potential within their own workforce, resulting in increased productivity, morale, and brand affinity. Today's conversation might spark an opportunity where LHH can partner with your organization to reinvigorate your career culture to be more innovative, proactive, and accountable. For other guests, this hour might be much more of a personal chance to consider how you might bring a shift in your career planning as we emerge out of the pandemic. And we are so excited to be joined today by Helen Basford, Global Capability Lead for AstraZeneca, and Sean Bartman, VP of Leadership Development from Royal Bank of Canada. So we give each one of them the opportunity to go a little bit more in depth about themselves. If we could start with you, Helen.
Hi, Jen. It's really lovely to be here, and thanks for inviting us on this discussion. So my name is Helen Basford, and yes, I'm the Global Capability Lead for coaching at AstraZeneca. So my role really is to ensure that we set the strategy for coaching, which permeates many parts of our business in terms of individual development, leadership development. So my role is to ensure that we're all pulling in the same direction when it comes to coaching and the various aspects that it involves.
Fantastic, and welcome, Helen. Glad to have you on today. Sean, would you like to say a few words about yourself?
Sure. Hey, thanks very much. I'm really excited to be here. Happy to be part of this discussion, this panel. Sean Bartman, I head up leadership development for RBC, and certainly I'm here to talk about coaching, and I am accountable for coaching and assessments for a portion of RBC, I'll say, but I'm also accountable for executive succession, recruitment, staffing, I think in general, our high potential pool, our management strategy, as well as our diversity strategies and development for our high potentials as well. So kind of a broader portfolio that I cover, but coaching really spans across all of those elements and is a really key part. So really happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for your time. We are so excited to get right into the conversation, but we are going to start with a poll to get a pulse of our audience today. So if you could take a second to answer the question, does your organization offer coaching as a benefit? So while we're waiting for those results, again, happy International Coaching Week to all of you. Really exciting to be able to have this session during International Coaching Week and support coaches all around the world. So we are excited to see the results. If you could just take a quick second, and then we will pull up the results to be able to see how many organizations actually offer coaching as a benefit. So results, about half and half. So we have 54% say yes, and 46% say no. So really quite interesting as we begin our discussion today. So we're going to jump right into the first question, and also just to let everyone know, we will have the Q&A available. So if you have any questions or anything that you want to ask, particularly for Helen or Sean, I will be watching that as well. And we will either intersperse them throughout the session, but we will also reserve some time at the end for some Q&A where you can ask them directly. So let's begin with the first question. And I'm going to pose this first to Helen. Why do you and AstraZeneca believe that coaching is an important part of development? And how do you see coaching fitting into the overall development strategy?
So it's a big question, and there's multiple parts to this answer, but AstraZeneca really does believe and understand the value in developing people, both at an individual level and a leadership level. And really, when you boil that down to what that means in practice and reality, it's around how we talk with one another, how we converse, how we take time out to reflect and think about taking stock as to where we go to from here. Now, that might sound like a slow process, and at AstraZeneca, there's nothing slow about anybody in our organization, but it's taking those moments to really do that. And coaching is definitely one of the ways in which we can provide that support and that development, whether it's through external coaching and bringing in external professional coaches, or helping our leaders and managers to develop their coaching approach to leadership. So we really do see it as something that, a bit like Sean said, it unlocks many different aspects. It's inclusive in its nature. It's curious in its nature. In our pursuit of innovation and in our pursuit of an inclusive culture from an R&D standpoint, getting the best from people, you know, there really is something that coaching is enabling across all of these aspects. So there isn't just a coaching strategy. This is about an approach to how we show up in work every day that actually touches many parts of what we're trying to achieve as an organization. So yes, I have the coaching strategy, you could say, and that is my remit to design, but it means that I have to work really collaboratively with many parts of our business to ensure that an element of coaching is really understood, what we mean by it, and that we're accessing all of the many parts of coaching that it can offer.
Oh, great thought. And I know, Helen, you and I have kind of talked about the fact that sometimes people see that as a tool, coaching as a tool. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, Jen, good call out, because you will have heard this from me before. So we often talk about coaching as a tool. And whenever I'm in a conversation with, you know, HR colleagues, they'll say, I'd really love to have coaching in my toolkit. And it can be that. Coaching can absolutely be something that you think to yourself, right, I'm going to have a coaching conversation now. What model have I learned? How do I bring that forward into this conversation? How could I apply it in this context? So yes, there is a space and time for that, absolutely. But coaching can be so much more. And more experienced coaches amongst us will know and appreciate the abilities that it has. And what I really try to talk a lot about, certainly within AstraZeneca, is that we don't want to view coaching as just a tool that you bring out on certain occasions, but rather an approach to interacting, an approach to conversation, an approach to leadership and developing others. And we've done a lot in our strategy around performance development, around how we really help people to be at their best. And at the core of all of those conversations is having a really great coaching conversation. So it's far-reaching, and I don't like to think of it as a tool, because it's actually more of an approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, one of the interesting things that we hear a lot, and we've seen a big movement of organizations trying to invest in helping people have what we call kind of the coach-like conversations, to use coaching in just everyday conversations. It doesn't have to be reserved for those formal situations. So fantastic point.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sean, what would you say, and how do you think that you and RBC believe that coaching is an important part of development, and how is it a part of the overall strategy?
Well, I thought Helen did an excellent job. What a nice way to start. Look, without, you know, reiterating a lot of, I think of what Helen was saying, I think for us as well, it is pervasive in a good way. It is just part of how we work. And as I think about your question, you know, it definitely is a critical part of our leadership development strategy, both formally and informally. You know, things like I mentioned, it will show up in the coaching that we provide to our executives or to our high potentials individually or through programs, our diverse segment programs, and our people managers for sure, 100%. And this could be coming up in things like during a transition into an executive role or a management role for the first time, for specific development needs, for programs, just part of growth. But beyond that formal element, and actually even more so formally within the business platforms themselves. So it's not just centrally through a center of expertise, but also as part of how the business operates, whether it's client-facing roles or service sales or service roles, or just part of the operating of an effective business. It is integrated there. And less formally, it's part of what we expect of our people leaders. It's part of the job of, and people forget that sometimes, it's part of being a people leader. And it's an important part of leading people and part of our approach. So is it an effective tool? Yes. And this is kind of where I think there's some overlap is, we see this as an important part of how we tap into performance and potential. And it's a skill or an approach versus a tool, as we were just saying. And I think that it also happens, you would expect it from your manager, you would expect it from your leader, but coaching also shows up from peers and within teams. And we all need feedback. We all need coaching. We all need challenge, direction, recognition, a sounding board to support our development and as leaders to develop other people. So I think that we really see it as part of the broader ecosystem of how we tap into and enable that potential. And I'll say one more thing. A lot of people look at coaching as something that's used to correct or deal with problem behaviors. That's not how we see it. We really see coaching as an investment in our talent. And it's one way that we can support the ongoing growth and development of our people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So we did get a question in chat. So could you elaborate a little bit more on why you believe coaching is inclusive? We hear sometimes coaching is more exclusive and it's not always offered for all. So it'd be great to understand and the explanation of how coaching is inclusive by nature. So Helen or Sean, a perspective on that?
Yeah, I'm very happy to have a perspective on that actually, because what we're talking about here is different things. So I know exactly what you mean when you say, hold on, isn't coaching exclusive? It tends to be reserved for very senior execs and not everybody gets access to it. But that's just one part of coaching. And that can be true in organizations that don't have budgets to spend on external coaching. That can be a reality. But coaching more and more is becoming more accessible, more democratized. It's far more wide-reaching than it ever was in the past. But where I really also like to focus is helping our leaders and our managers adopt a coaching approach to the way that they lead and manage. And when you really sort of break that down, at the heart of coaching is a real curiosity about what is meaningful and what other people see in terms of their perspectives. So when we talk about inclusive and we talk about, I&D strategies, or we talk about neurological diversity and bringing that into the conversation, it really still requires a person to say, Jen, that was a really interesting point you made. Help me to understand more about what that means to you. And could you go a little further into that? So for a leader or for whoever's maybe leading the conversation, instead of shutting that idea down, there's an opportunity there to really invite in. And that kind of questioning, those open questions, that curiosity, that invitation in is what I'm referring to when I'm talking about being inclusive. So yes, there's a practical element of, do we have all the right people in the room? But that can sometimes be a little bit of a tick box exercise. It's really about what happens within the dynamic of the conversation that can be really inclusive or actually just shut ideas down as they come up. And if we're really trying to harness innovation and new ideas and different ways of thinking, we can all get into that habit really well by learning some coaching approach to how you lead.
Yeah, and I love what you said there, Helen. Sorry, go ahead, Sean.
No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I love that because that takes away the exclusivity of it. You know, when it's all about, yes, that is a piece of what can coaching look like, but also the internal capability and building it within our managers and leaders and really just anyone having a conversation. So thank you for that. Sean, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, like, if I just spin it around from the employee perspective, right? The employee, like, who is it who thinks that it's exclusive? It's often it's the employee, and you know, and sometimes it can be, as we're saying, there are formalized programs for certain things. But I think that there's also the informal approach. We talked about the relationships between you and your manager, or you and your leader, you and your team. There are often other programs that can be more inclusive that are constructed, let's say, from the center, and there could be peer coaching and mentorship that can happen. But from an employee's perspective, I think, to answer the question, if they were asking, is like, you may or may not be on the formal coaching program. But that doesn't mean you can't go get coaching, find coaching. Again, you can tap into your team, your manager, or even past relationships. So I think that more and more we're seeing a scale, if you will, of offerings from very specific, nuanced coaching that may be contracted to broader programs to relationships that exist through current hierarchical structures and or team structures, and then also past relationships. And so I think that it's just about the lens of how we look at coaching and the different levers across that spectrum. And I think some of this exclusive or inclusive is just about framing and helping people to understand how to think and look at coaching other than just through a pinhole, but the broader perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think one of the takeaways that hopefully we're all getting today is that coaching doesn't have to fit into one box, that it can be looked at and should be looked at more broadly as how do you build the capability to be able to have coaching be a part of everything that you do. So thank you. Next question, I'm going to pose this first to you, Sean. How have you seen coaching support leaders in facing challenges, and why do you think it worked?
Mm-hmm. This is another really good question. So I think like one of the biggest challenges is the trend during the transition period. So particularly I'll say when somebody moves into an executive role for the first time, during that as a large transition and a challenging period to adjust. And so, coaching can provide that objective or independent sounding board where a new executive or potentially a new manager just needs a safe place to test out some thinking. Also, it can help in terms of a bit of a cultural guide around how do you determine what is or what is not appropriate in a new environment, particularly if you're coming into a new organization. And so to acclimate to that. And so a coach who understands the business as well as the human side of the coaching needs is incredibly helpful. And of course, if there's any individual development needs that are needed to help enable success, that can happen as well. So I think there's one challenge or one example would be during transition. And I think it's important. And sometimes we say, well, just drink from the fire hose and you'll learn and then go and execute, but if you're thinking about really accelerating people's potential and performance, this is a real opportunity and approach to do that. So think of it from an accelerator perspective of the great talent that you have. And I'd say beyond executive transitions, we do look at coaching as an opportunity. How do we gain competitive advantage through impacting the how, if you will, of our leaders' performance? And I mean leadership at all levels of leadership. And so we really look to tie in coaching to amplify our leadership model and those behaviors that we know connect to accelerating results. So I think by relying on during transitions, but also our leadership model really allows us to set our leaders up for success to tackle whatever challenges that's in front of them. I'm speaking more broadly as opposed to Bob or Jane needs this specific thing, but on the aggregate, that's how we look at it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Sean. Helen, what would you add to this?
So, and I absolutely, we use coaching in similar ways at AstraZeneca as to what Sean has just said. We've got the range of transition coaches and I&D coaching. We've got the range of new managers, for instance, or somebody being promoted into a new role. But we also use coaching as a support to personal development or leadership development. So even if I look across all the programs from a development perspective that we offer in AstraZeneca, and it is a really generous offer actually coming into this organization, I was really struck by at every stage of the development journey, there is a really great form of development there. And it's pretty much always accompanied by an element of coaching. So for a start, people get to experience what coaching is, whilst at the same time learning about taking a coaching approach. So we've kind of got two elements there. But what that does is it can provide one layer of support in terms of the person's development as they move on in their careers, as they move into different parts of the organization, for instance, or even in parts where they get promoted or moved up or relocate. So we try to respond in those ways. But I think why it's really resonating with me right now is that, particularly at AstraZeneca, it's I think you only need to look in a newspaper to know that it's quite visible organization at the moment for obvious reasons. And as a result, we've had a really heavy lift in the past 18 months with our organization and with our leaders. And and I've been really pleased to be able to support a lot of those leaders who have gone through a really impressively heavy time over the last little while, but equally proud to be able to support them by giving them that space. And I think there is something that coaching really brings around the very fast-paced environment that a leader can find themselves in, with lots of noise and lots of pressure. And coaching kind of carves out that space to just reflect and stop and really think and, even reset, even readjust. And it's a real gift when those opportunities are enabled to happen. What I would also say is that there is something around being responsive to leaders in those places, and they don't have to be really senior leaders. We're talking about leaders at leadership and management at every level here. So there's certainly something here that I've noticed about stepping outside of what is just what we would normally offer around transitions and the usual kind of coaching support that might be relevant, but also identifying when people get stuck, for instance, or they're in a particular sort of frame of mind where they're struggling to see how they can move forward. And I think noticing that, being connected with your people enough to know when that might be happening, and being able to support with something that's a really personalized, highly confidential environment to be able to sit back, reflect, pause, and gain momentum then for being ready to go again, essentially, and how we support people to do that. I think that's a really important aspect of it.
I think you both brought up such a great point about just kind of the unprecedented change, the challenges that leaders are facing, everyone's facing, within organizations. And really what's been kind of nice and heartwarming is to see that when leaders were struggling, when people were struggling last year, many organizations did continue to invest in coaching and said, maybe I don't know what to do for this person. So coaching might be the answer, or might be a help, might be a support. And so that was, I know probably this audience here would know that this is supportive, but it was great to see, that wasn't the time that people said, let's take a step back and let's actually instead help them to pause, reflect. I mean, this is something leaders were not at all used to, or any of us were used to, in unprecedented challenges. So it was great to see, very heartwarming to see.
Yeah, great.
Helen, so given that unprecedented change, which has really sparked some innovation, broad sweeping change in the way we live and work everywhere, how has a culture which emphasizes coaching helped organizations pivot and innovate? And if you have any examples to share, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of the organization that's at the front line of having to have pivoted massively in the last 18 months and really innovate and really got behind a purpose that was not just, not for the business's, best interest, but for the best interests of humanity. And that is a very large purpose to get behind. And, what has really struck me about AstraZeneca is how dedicated everybody is to really keeping the patient at the forefront of everything that we do. So my role is to support those leaders and those people to be able to support the patients, right? So my perspective is, how do we support them to enable them to do the best work that they can do in the interests of the world and humanity? And there is something really grounding about that. And also a point at which we need to remember that, people are human beings. No one has come out of the last 18 months unscathed. No one. Everybody's been touched by this, and it's been a heavy go for the last 18 months. And that's just the course of the pandemic. That's not taking into account other things that happen in people's lives and along that journey. So, really trying to get back to, how do we support people in the best ways, and how do we really, and I think this certainly in the past year, it's really brought that home, is that we can't keep separating business from personal, and actually we need to recognize that we're dealing with people as a whole, and that comes with personal and business and people are multifaceted. And as much as you can support people with leadership development work, with training, with mentoring, there's a lot of support that can be done. I think the thing that differentiates coaching, or taking a coaching approach, is that it becomes way much more personalized. So it's really about, okay, so knowing all about this, how are things for you in this context right now? And how do you keep moving forward and finding that space to think, right, this is what's right for me? Remaining true to yourself and finding that path forward is what a coach can really help you to do. So it's absolutely important in all layers of leadership, but also for an individual level, to be able to kind of have those conversations to see how they move forward.
Yeah, I love that you said the human connection, because it really is, it's the humanization of what we're working on or what we're experiencing. And, we don't want to get away from the fact that coaching affects people personally and professionally. So I know probably, Helen and Sean, we've all experienced where we've coached somebody who has said, whatever we've talked about impacts them somewhere else, impacts them in the way they communicate at home, in the way they are productive in other environments. So this definitely bleeds over in a great positive way. So the impact of coaching cannot be only just in the development goals that someone sets, but it's what they talk about with their coaches in the moment, in those confidential, psychologically safe environments where they're able to just kind of pause and reflect, as we talked about. So I think that's the power, that's the exciting thing, and why we do what we do, of course, too. Sean,
absolutely, and why I don't like to talk about it as a toolkit, because actually it's an approach, right? For those very reasons.
Great example of that. Sean, would love to hear from you too, from Royal Bank of Canada. So given, again, the unprecedented change, how is a culture which emphasizes coaching and helped your organization pivot and innovate? And if you have any examples to share.
Sure. I pause because your last comment around how things trickle over into the home life, I'll just share a small personal story that's more funny. I had somebody who was working for me, and I was coaching them, and their particular element that we were working on was to be a little more expecting and elevated in terms of managing altitude and not getting in the weeds, but just expecting and increasing, I guess, his business acumen. And it was progressing, making great progress. And I remember he told me, he's like, yeah, I was talking to my mom the other day, and I said, come on, mom. And so there was an additional coaching moment there, which was, please keep that part at work and be nice to your mother. So just, reminded me of that when we're talking about how coaching just bleeds over into real life. Anyway, a funny situation. On a more serious note, the unprecedented change, for sure. So I know that this conversation is around coaching. But I'd say the answer, or my answer to this, is really beyond coaching, but connected to coaching. And I say that is what was and continues to be key in managing change, performance, potential, and innovation in your question has really been for us about leading with purpose and putting our clients, and if I think particularly in 2020, we're putting our clients, putting our employees, putting our communities at the center of our decision making. And so with teams, this means having, and bring into the coaching, with teams, this really means having two-way conversations. And a lot of that was so important, particularly last year, of just opening up the dialogue, listening and connecting, which is the root of where coaching starts. And then from there, coaching really helps us to find, as we talk about the pivoting, really helps us in finding and highlighting where are the, I'd say two things, where are the opportunities that we have, but also the barriers that we need to overcome to pivot and to get to that next level. And I'll say personally, I think that all coaching done right is really about short-circuiting your everyday so that you can see and do things even better. And so I think that if we're obsessively focused on this, then we can't help but pivot. We can't help but get better. We can't help but innovate for the future and just how we work and how we operate. And I'll close with, don't forget to be nice to your mother.
I love that. I love that example. Yes. So when you're a coach, or when you are a coach, you end up finding these opportunities. I know my family will say, am I being coached right now? So I'm asking relatively coach-like conversations, right? But yeah, so I think that so was important around pivoting and looking more broadly. So I really like what you said there, Sean, about looking at just overall how organizations, not even through just a coaching lens, but looking at it from the overall workings, how you pivot, how you innovate, all really depends on this mindset also around development and how do we develop, how do we improve, and looking for those small opportunities. So I'm taking away as a comment of this is around look for those little opportunities, those steps forward and opportunities to get better. So thank you for that. I'm going to go to the Q&A just to make sure I'm catching. There's a lot of great discussion here. So let me pick out one and then we'll get to one of our last questions here. So how do you ensure leaders are actually having coaching conversations day to day? And there's a follow-up question about how do you measure ROI building a coaching culture? So Helen or Sean, would either of you like to take or start off that question?
Yeah, I can take the first one, and Sean, happy to, if you want to take the second one, but I can speak to both. So yeah, we do a couple of things actually. There's not just one approach to how we, in essence, ensure that managers are taking a coaching approach. So first of all, you have to educate. So, there are a number of different opportunities to help managers and leaders to learn this work and to learn the approach. And for some, it's more natural than others. So there's some work to be done in terms of learning it, but then also in the practice of that. So we teach it, but we also provide opportunities for peer coaching forums for managers and employees to come together to, talk about where it's challenging, where they get stuck. In fact, earlier today, I was talking to the leading business community in our organization, and these are, pretty senior leaders, but not the most senior, but they're all going, how do we have these conversations? I get stuck at this point. How can I do that slightly differently? So we're offering lots of practical ways to ensure that managers feel comfortable with this. But in terms of whether they're actually doing it or not, so we ask those questions. We ask them through surveys, we ask them through pulse surveys, we ask them through manager feedback. We get 180 feedback from line reports to say, well, how is your manager doing with this style of conversation? And, it's really helpful in that managers can look at that and go, well, yeah, actually, so I'm probably doing really well with the supportive style of coaching, but perhaps what I'm not doing enough of is challenging in the moment and challenging, asking some more challenging questions. or, you know, it brings up some stuff that they can then focus on and learn. So through a number of different sort of sources and data sources, and anecdotally, we have a number of different development centers that people go through. There's lots of opportunities to pull in multiple layers of data to sort of gain a picture of, are we really shifting the needle in this area? Firstly, are our people feeling more confident in this area? And are the recipients really experiencing this? And also know how to identify it in order to be able to say whether they've experienced it or not. So there is a number of different things happening that collectively, when we pull all that sort of analytical data together, we can start to see, you know, how are we really doing in this space? And is it really having the impact that we want it to have? And naturally, we then start to look broader in terms of how does that impact on our retention strategy? How does that impact on people's satisfaction in terms of their role? How does that impact on their relationships with their line managers, etc.? So there's a number of different indicators that we look at, which, you know, there's still plenty more work to be done in that area. It's definitely not fully baked yet, but there's some really good information, especially over the last couple of years, to see that we are moving in the right direction.
Yeah, fantastic.
Hey, if I can just add on to that. So I think the part of, like, I think that some of the question here was, how do we ensure managers are doing this? And I think we need to just tell them. And so if I think at RBC, about 4-ish years ago, we reimagined our approach to performance. And I know a lot of organizations out there have and are doing that now. And moving away from the traditional set goals, maybe have a mid-year, maybe have a year-end, everybody's surprised because there's not a lot of talking in between, and here's your rating, et cetera. And the part of the shift of what we did was to an always-on conversation, and which was and dynamic goals and all sorts of wonderful stuff that comes with, you know, the new version of performance enablement as opposed to performance management. But the key element of this was, hey, managers, you need to be having frequent check-ins and active two-way conversations with your teams. You need to be giving and asking for feedback. You need to be providing coaching. You need to be providing recognition on the regular. And so, and certainly, you know, following that, there was training and we have employee engagement surveys, et cetera, as well on the way to further support that. But I think by being very explicit around, this is the expectation and this is what success looks like. And then come our year end, we also assess them, and all of us, not just managers, on, and we're very clear about it, on the what and the how. And our how is tied to our leadership model, which has a number of things in it, but one of them is about unlocking the potential of our talent. So we've told them up front, we've equipped them to do it, you know, continually. We certainly the surveys and training along the way, and the conversation, at least at year end, around how am I doing with feedback is really helpful. And there's probably 3 types of managers on the aggregate out there. There's the ones that are really good at this and are doing it, have been doing it anyways. There's the ones that in the middle that want to do it and maybe just don't know how or how to do it well. We certainly can help those. And then some that maybe just don't get it or don't want to. And I think there's your question around, okay, well, how do we provide them with the right training, coaching, support, et cetera, to meet the expectation that is needed as part of the culture, or data is often very helpful with that when you can work with facts, or maybe even make some tough decisions, right? So I think being explicit and having multiple mechanisms along the way, and they don't have to be complicated or big, heavy investments, but they need to be clear. And I think that that's something that, and the clear in an ongoing conversation, I think will be helpful. And then it becomes less about a punitive, how do we get managers to do this? And it just becomes how we work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you made a great point around, I think, you know, what we see often is that organizations and leaders feel like they've been coaching. And it's when they've started to be exposed to more learning or training or education around coaching, they see, wow, maybe I haven't been coaching, you know, or maybe it isn't the approach that I thought I was taking is actually the approach I need to be taking for coaching. And so I think that can be a really eye-opening experience for many leaders who maybe feel like, oh, you know what, this coaching thing, I've been doing it for a number of years. but truly seeing the power of what it can take and how it can look very, very different from maybe the preconceived notions of how those conversations have gone.
Yeah, and Jen, just to add to that, I think I completely agree with you. The amount of leaders that I've worked with that, feel relatively comfortable in that space until they really understand what coaching actually sounds like and feels like. And that penny dropping moment is always that moment where everybody goes a bit quiet in the room when they realize they actually probably haven't been coaching, but they've been mentoring more often or just training, showing in a really nice way. But what I would also add to that is there is definitely something around this approach to coaching where there's that moment of understanding, but there's also that idea that if I'm going to coach, I'm doing it for the other person. And what is often missed is that actually this is a great benefit for the leader themselves. This is when I've worked with leaders on sort of leader as coach work, and they start to really understand this at a deeper level. The word that they come out with is it's liberating. And they keep saying, I wish I'd learned to lead people and manage people in this way 20 years ago. This should have been brought in way back when. It's pity that it's taken me till now to really realize this. So as much as we often think that coaching is lovely to do for the other person, it absolutely is. But there is huge benefit to the individual actually learning those skills. And I think it's only once they really go through that learning that they start to unpack just how powerful it is, both personally and for their teams around them.
Fantastic point. So we learn as much as the coachee and coach as we would when we are the ones being coached. So that opportunity to really learn, and you're going to know much more when you take a coaching approach as a leader. So opening up a dialogue as opposed to just the telling part. Okay, here's what you need to do. Here's how you get started. The innovation's not going to come there. The innovation comes from asking, so what's another way we could look at this? Or tell me more about how you've positioned a certain opportunity. So that opens up the organization to more innovative thoughts and ideas and strategies or initiatives that maybe would have been lost if we didn't take that type of approach.
Yeah. And there's a need for, there is a time and place for answering questions and providing advice. Absolutely there is. Hey, I'm going to go meet with these people and, okay, let me tell you about who's in the room and whatnot. Some quick answers can be helpful, but it's not coaching. Advice and coaching are two completely different things. Answering questions and coaching are different, but there definitely is a need for both, and it should be in the skill set.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sean, as you look ahead, how will coaching continue to foster the well-being of organizations and employees to help them thrive? Or are there any changes that you think need to be necessary in order for that to happen?
Yeah, well, I think, look, most obviously, the move to remote or digital and video. We were experimenting with this prior to COVID, but certainly in 2020, it really ignited the uptake and I'd say interest in what coaching could look like from a more remote or hybrid type approach. I will say when we were launching some of this, I tried it myself. And I was a little skeptical at first, I will admit, and I was pleasantly surprised. Like, what a great, I was looking forward to it. I felt like the coaching engagement and the relationship was easily made and maintained. It was an excellent experience. And so I'm glad I personally did that, and I can understand and it's helpful that with 2020, as terrible as 2020 was, that there is some good that has come out of that, and people's appreciation and ability to connect and interact in a meaningful way through remote arrangements. I think that the future, though, I think scale is really, and it kind of ties into some earlier questions around inclusive and exclusive, et cetera. I think that, we and many organizations are thinking about how do we take coaching and scale this, which is a challenge. And as we move more online and digital, that does give us an opportunity that we haven't had necessarily or or leveraged in the past to really extend access beyond those special arrangements, beyond your manager, as I talked about the culture of coaching, but to have more specific contracted, if you will, coaching, targeted coaching engagements. I think that opens it up a lot more, where we can support leaders and employees across the organization for individual needs. This is definitely going to be part of our offer and how we look at coaching more at scale. And I'll say the last thing is, what we're looking at now is coaching as more of an ecosystem. So coaching can often be fragmented. It happens here, it happens here, it happens here. You may have received coaching here, here, here in your career, but is there a string that draws it all together? Do we look at coaching and talent together and figure, how do we best tap into the ecosystem of our coaching, and whether that's a cadre of formal coaches or digital coaching or management coaching or peer coaching or global coaching elements? How do we step back and actually look at that ecosystem and have a strategy that ties that together, not just for now, but over the trend line of your career and of the broader talent basis career? So it's a big kind of thought and a big piece to tackle, but I think important more so. And it just takes the value of the coaching beyond the relationship and into, now we're stepping out, like it's a different perspective here. Is like, put on your CEO hat, right? So we're putting on the employee hat. I think I talked about, how does an employee think? We've been talking most along the lines of maybe managers, but certainly COE or owners of coaching. If we put on the CEO hat, then how is coaching helping to achieve our purpose, to achieve our business strategy? How are we investing in our talent for a greater outcome? Yes, the individual talent and performance, but how about that broader collective, and thinking of it that way? I think that's the future, how we should be thinking.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more about allowing and the opportunity for coaching to be more widespread, for more people. It isn't just for a chosen few, it can be for anyone. And we're actually having so many more organizations and individuals raising their hand and saying, I want to have a coach. Where in the past, it was more of a push type of, here you're getting a coach, or we're going to give you the opportunity to have a coach. We're having so many more people ask, can I have a coach? Or how can I have a coach? So being able to offer that to more people through scalability is absolutely important. Helen, anything you want to add to that? What's the future of coaching look like in your mind?
Wow, it depends how far in the future you want me to go. I mean, I'm always keeping one eye on that horizon, and I think there's incredible technology and AI, RI that's all coming in. AR, it's all coming together to help us to think more digitally around how we connect better with people. And I think there is something, you only sort of need to look at something like Microsoft Mesh, for instance, to see what are those possibilities in terms of not just connecting, but really connecting without being sort of stuck at a laptop for 8 hours of your day, but actually connecting, collaborating, talking in different ways. And I can absolutely see a space in the future as it becomes more evolved and developed where coach that really works with a coaching agenda. I think where we are with it now is that people struggle to have connection at distance. And I think this is a theme I keep hearing from managers. It's a theme I was even hearing from coaches a lot before the pandemic started, which is we can't have these kind of conversations over the internet, was often the term used back then, but we can't have these conversations virtually. I'm only really effective as a coach, or I'm only really effective as a manager having those kind of conversations if I can see somebody in person. I need to take them for a coffee. I need to take them away from them. And simply, we don't have those options at the moment. And it's unlikely that that will become a reality going forward. We're seeing a huge movement towards hybrid working. And certainly as we become a lot more of a global ways of working, I don't even sit in the same country as most of my peers. There's possibly, people that I will never meet face to face. So does that mean that I can't ever really connect with someone on that level? In my view, no. I think there is something around this headspace, our mindset around how we purposefully create moments of connection. And that needs to be in a virtual space. And I would say often that we use the term in coaching around holding the mirror up for others so that they may see themselves. Well, that's kind of what we're all doing right now, right? We're looking through a screen at the face of another person. And so if you are so in that space and you're trying to dominate that space, whether being a coach or a leader or a manager or whoever you might be, then actually you've missed the point of what a coaching conversation is about, because it's not about you. It's about the other person. So I think there is a mindset shift that needs to happen up front. I think we need to embrace technology, because if you're not, I think you're going to be left behind. The younger generations are born with technology in hand. It's a very natural part of how they connect and what they connect about, what the personal level of sharing looks like. So, you know, I think it's something that we don't want to resist, but we want to get behind and keep that eye on the future, to work with it, not against it.
Yeah. I think it's a great point. I think what we've seen over the past 15, 16 months is that we can connect through virtual opportunities. And actually, when we have the opportunity to maybe get back into an office or see each other, we can pick up where we left off, you know, in many ways, because of the ability to be able to, you know, change our mindset around connecting through this way, like we're doing today. So in the interest of time, if it's okay, I'm going to go to a couple of the questions. We have a lot of questions in the Q&A, so thank you all for sending all of them. I know we won't get to all of them today, but I'll pick out some that we can talk about with the panelists here. So here's one question. In looking to, this individual is looking to create a culture of feedback and getting employees comfortable with peer-to-peer coaching. Any tips on how to start that journey?
Hey, I can do that. Why don't I start that one? So when we at RBC transitioned to performance enablement from performance management, feedback was, I'll tell you what we learned. So we were leading with feedback, and we introduced a feedback app even. And so it was like 3 request, give feedback. And we had like the detailed version and the lighter version. And we used an IO psychologist around, you know, the right words. Like it wasn't like, it was focus here first, as opposed to you're terrible at this kind of thing. Like we used all the right words, and we realized that leading with feedback is really hard. It's really hard. People don't naturally want to give and or receive, maybe give, but definitely don't want to receive. And then upwards feedback is really complicated as well. And so I would say is the learning that, like, if I were to go back and that that app is no longer, we got rid of it. And we use that story all the time around, like, we talk about how do you fail forward. And like, that was one, and we put a lot of effort around that, and we gave it a year plus, and it just wasn't picking up. And so we made a decision to stop and move away. We still have feedback mechanisms that are built in through routines and conversations and check-ins. And we encourage it, and you can do it through like the existing tools. But I would say, if I were to go back and do it again, I would lead with recognition, which is a form of feedback as well. Hey, and people learn from that. And, hey, Helen, what a great answer. That last answer you did was incredibly impactful. I think it resonated and people appreciated it, and you brought it to a level that made sense. And, you inspired me as well with what you said, and I'm going to go do things differently. And there's truth in that. And so there's some element of feedback. So I would say lead with if your culture is already there for feedback, then go for it. If your culture, which is probably rare, if your culture is not, then maybe lead with recognition, and then work your way into feedback. Work feedback into the routines. Talk about broader check-in. Talk about broader coaching, that being an element of coaching and an important element. Share stories of how people, proof points, where you've taken not just, again, my manager and others around me gave feedback, but proof points of where you've had a leader who've asked for feedback were more successful for it. Stories carry weight. And look, maybe I'll stop there, but I do think that it's just going full on feedback is really challenging. I would package it and talk, and sometimes people are giving feedback and don't even realize it. Like I talked about the new manager or new executive, let's say new manager onboarding and a team effectiveness. Well, you build feedback into that, right? You know, what don't you know? Give some feedback, two-way feedback. Afterwards, you can say, hey, that was actually feedback, right? You can call to past events and just reframe it as feedback or recognition or whatnot. So hopefully there's a few nuggets in here that might be helpful in answering the question. But the big one is package it and or lead with recognition, lead with feedback if you want, but just be cautious. As a mechanism first on its own. Feedback is incredibly important and we need it. It's definitely important.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Sean. Helen, I'm going to give you the last word on that. So do you have any just quick last tidbit on that?
I'll make it brief. Yeah, absolutely. So actually feedback in the organization sits with me, but we call it feed forward because feedback typically triggers two things. It triggers defensiveness and it triggers judgment. And when it's done poorly, it can be a really devastating conversation, as I'm sure many of us have experienced along the way of someone's well-meaning, but delivered something to us and we kind of went, whoa, you know, how does that sit? The important thing about why we've taken it as from a feed forward perspective is because it's all about the intent. This is about looking briefly back to notice something that's happened, to bring it into the conversation, to ask permission to say, would it be all right if I gave you some feed forward, with the intent that next time around, there might be a little improvement or an awareness to change something. But it's all around creating building that relationship first. So it is a really supportive conversation rather than what can be sometimes, we do often see a lot of is very damaging situations or damaging conversations, but to really focus on building the relationship first in order to give that feed forward really successfully.
Thank you so much, Helen. And we could talk about that all day, couldn't we? So in the interest of time, thank you so much, Helen and Sean. The time has flown by. I hope all of you in the audience have had a wonderful and enlightening experience, and we welcome all of the participation. Thank you for all of your questions. I know we didn't get to all of them today, but we will take account of all of those and keep those into effect for the next sessions. But again, wishing everyone a wonderful day. Helen and Sean, many, many thanks, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thank you so much, Jen. Lovely to see you too, Sean. Thank you.
Bye-bye.